Now, Mr. Tharman, wherever you are, you have control. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Dr. Yoichi Funabashi and Ambassador Makio Miyagawa, for giving me this privilege of addressing you at this Asia-Pacific Initiative Forum. Both Funabashi-san and Miyagawa-san are well known to me. I've had the privilege of knowing them for a long time. So it is a double pleasure for me to be here addressing you this afternoon. We are, of course, in very unusual times, which explains why we are now meeting virtually in Yokohama. Unusual both because of COVID-19, but also the confluence of COVID-19 with challenges of a fundamental and longer-term nature, both nationally within our societies, as well as internationally. We are in fact dealing with three realities at the same time. The first, of course, is COVID-19, which Miyagawa-san described as a cataclysm. It is a complex challenge for all of us, wherever we are in the world, not just a healthcare challenge, but also an economic challenge and a social challenge, because we face a real risk of accentuating existing inequalities in the cause of this pandemic. And we've got to tackle those inequalities at the same time that we try to support our societies and our economies and recover from COVID. So that's the first reality, which we're all familiar with, and I don't need to elaborate about. But there's also a second reality which is now unfolding before us. And that is what Funabashi-san just highlighted, which is that the way in which business is being done and the way in which work is going to be arranged is already changing. COVID has accelerated changes which were already happening, and what we thought of as a future scenario has become the present. In other words, we are fast forwarded into the future. We are not going to go back to where we were before COVID. The shape of demand has changed. The way in which supply chains are being organized has changed. The way in which work is being organized, the way in which jobs are being conducted has changed. So we now have to re-gear ourselves for a new future, quite apart from recovering from the COVID-19 crisis. And thirdly, we have a third reality, which is that we are also dealing with the problems we have inherited from the past, which continue to bedevil us and continue to make the future a complex and daunting one. These are the deeper underlying challenges that we face everywhere in the world, and certainly in the most advanced societies. First, there has been a long-term stagnation in the middle of society, those earning median incomes, those in the broad middle of society, particularly in the advanced world. And this has been going on for quite a long period of time. It has led to a loss of optimism in a whole range of advanced societies across the world. And without that optimism, it is very hard to deal and to tackle this problem, because the source of the solution has to be improved productivity growth. And improved productivity growth requires a new wave of innovation, investments and innovation. But innovation comes best when you have some mood of optimism in society, a desire to get ahead, a desire to grow, young people wanting to do much better than the previous generation, and older folk having the confidence that young people are going to do better. So we are caught in a bit of a loop of stagnation, declining, a spirit of pessimism or declining optimism, and weak productivity and innovation. And we have to break out of this loop. A second legacy we inherit, which is extremely important, is of course climate change. It's not just a legacy, but going to be an even more forceful part of the future. And we have to address this forthrightly and boldly, even as we come out of COVID-19. And a further challenge we face, which envelopes what we're talking about is the weakening of multilateralism and the gradual fragmentation in international affairs, economic as well as strategic. That weakening of multilateralism too has to be arrested, and we need to find new ways of forging a cooperative international order that is suited to the challenges we face. So we have these three realities that we have to tackle at the same time. If we only tackle COVID-19 and we postpone the other problems, we will find ourselves in an even more dangerous future. So we have to address the three challenges at the same time, and it makes this the most complex problem that the world has faced in a very long time. It requires a new collective spirit, and it requires concrete partnerships. Collective spirit or solidarity, as Prime Minister Suga just highlighted, as well as concrete partnerships, nationally, regionally, and internationally. Those things are connected. We will not be able to succeed in our national strategies if we are not at the same time pursuing a more open and cooperative international order. But we will not succeed in forging a new multilateralism if we do not address the challenges within our own societies, and particularly that loss of optimism and that sense of divergences between those who have less and those who have more. The two things go together and they reinforce each other. And I'll talk very briefly about each of the three levels of solidarity that we have to build and rebuild for the future, and the concrete partnerships that are possible. First, within our own countries, community and social solidarity. That's fundamental. And COVID has been an eye-opener in many ways, because if you look around the world, the societies that have dealt best with COVID-19 have been those with a high degree of social trust, where people know that if I play my part and everyone else plays their part, we will all be better off. But we have to play our part. And I play my part because I trust that everyone else is going to play their part. That's how societies that have been able to control COVID relatively well and kept fatalities especially very low have been able to do it. It's not just the government rules and edicts and measures, which of course are extremely important, but social trust is also important. And we have to rebuild social trust in an era where those with less are facing tough going in their jobs, in their incomes, at work. And in many countries also facing tough going in being able to get housing. So we have to address these issues, and address these issues at a time when our societies are getting older as well. And as societies get older, we need to translate social trust into community partnerships so that wherever the elderly are living, they can stay active, they can have full lives, they can have contributing lives, and they feel valued. Japan has been one of the leaders in this regard because it started aging earlier, and it has many innovations at a local level, at a community level, that we in Singapore study very carefully, but are examples for how we should all do it. Everything from keeping the elderly employed, for instance, micro jobs in the community. You have your Silver's Human Resources Centers, for instance, in many municipalities, finding ways of keeping the elderly active with micro jobs in schools, childcare centers, and many other community functions, just as an example. But social solidarity takes on new meaning and new forms as our society ages. So that's the first level, social and community solidarity. The second level is at the national level. We need new public-private community partnerships to tackle the challenges of the future. It requires first and foremost that government policies, especially fiscal policies, budgetary policies, have to refocus on public goods, not just the redistribution of revenues across different groups and societies, but focus on public goods that benefit the majority, because there's now a crying need for reinvestment in public goods wherever we look across the world. Investment in R&D, of course, for clean energies, for sustainable agriculture, for the circular economy. Investments in broadband access, cheap, fast broadband access for the public and for SMEs. Investment in new training infrastructures, refreshed technical and applied training infrastructures to prepare for a new world of work. And upgraded transport and water infrastructures in many countries. These are public goods. They don't just benefit one group or another, they benefit all our populations. And we have to refocus on these public goods. But we also have to, as Prime Minister Suga mentioned, we have to tap on the power of the private sector. And the purpose of budgetary policy, the purpose of fiscal policy, must also be to incentivize a new wave of private investment, including private investment in public goods, in public infrastructure, through new public-private partnerships. It can be done. There are good examples of this in many countries, and we have to scale it up. We have to incentivize a new era of private investment, both in commercial activity as well as in public infrastructure. Another very important challenge nationally, because the world of work is changing, is that we need new public-private partnerships to be able to match people to new jobs as quickly as possible and to upskill and reskill them for new jobs in ways that reflect their prior skills and experience, do not neglect their existing human capital, but help them to build on their human capital. This is a central economic challenge. How do we provide enough jobs, but enough good jobs across our populations? The market alone is not going to solve this problem, but government alone can't solve this problem. It requires new public-private partnerships. Firms alone, in an era of lifelong employment, would have invested in their people and tried to solve the problem. But we are well past that era. Workers will have to switch between firms, between sectors, between different types of jobs, more often in their careers. And we now need to have both firms, governments, and training institutions working in tight partnership to help everyone who is displaced or even is expected to be displaced in future from their jobs to be retrained, upskilled, and matched into a new job that builds on their previous careers and their previous skills. It's an important social and economic challenge. We also need new partnerships to ensure that we have a vibrant SME sector in future. The SME sector everywhere in the world has been hardest hit by COVID-19. We understand why. And we've got to ensure that as we come out of this crisis, we do not end up with economies that are even more concentrated. The big players know what to do. They know how to rearrange their supply chains, including global supply chains. They know how to take advantage of digitalization. We've got to make sure that our economies also have vibrant SME sectors, and this requires new partnerships as well. First and foremost, to ensure that the SME sector can take advantage of digital connectivity within our own economies, but also very importantly, as Prime Minister Suga also highlighted, through digital cross-border connectivity. Japan, Singapore, and some other countries are taking the lead in this, in forging new norms, new standards for data to flow across borders in ways that doesn't just benefit the biggest players, but benefits enterprise generally. It can be done. And we now have, I think, a certain momentum behind these initiatives, and we've got to see it through. See through this new era of connectivity that benefits a broad base of enterprises in our societies. I think the international level, which is my last theme, is really critical because we are at a critical moment in international affairs. We have seen this drift away from multilateralism, this gradual fragmentation of international affairs, and we now have to arrest it and find ways in which, recognizing different national interests, we are still able to forge a new cooperative international order. We do have to provide more reliable funding for global public goods. COVID-19 has made that very clear. Many countries have responded through the COVAX initiative, although the funding is still well short of what is required. But more importantly, it's not just about COVID, it's about future pandemics and future major global healthcare crises, which unfortunately are going to come. And we do not currently have a system for reliable and sustainable funding of global public goods in healthcare. It is currently reactive, it is discretionary, and it is too little. That's an example of a global public good that will serve every nation's interests. Climate change, we understand very well. Obviously, there's a global public good involved, and if we don't tackle it well, and we don't each play our part, we will all be worse for it. Japan has taken the lead in setting a carbon neutral target by 2050. China has taken the lead now in setting a 2060 target for carbon neutrality. But we now need to work on markets, and we need to work on concrete partnerships to enable carbon markets to direct resources to the most effective carbon abatement solutions and incentivize countries with green lungs to preserve those green lungs. Japan, Korea, and China, three major carbon pricing jurisdictions in Asia, have decided now to come together, hold annual meetings on carbon emissions trading with the aim of forming a unified market for carbon trading. I think that's a very important initiative. Singapore, which is the first country in Southeast Asia to introduce a carbon tax, is also looking forward to international carbon credit and the markets that will allow for trading and exchange and the proper distribution of resources to the most effective solutions. So regional collaboration in international carbon trading is an important initiative and an example of the concrete partnerships that we can form. Second, green finance has huge potential. Mitsubishi UFG Financial Group, MUFJ, has been one of the leaders in this area. In fact, they're working very closely with us in Singapore as well to promote green finance. This is a critical area of transition that we have to make in Asia. Transition from coal to cleaner fossil fuels and to renewable energies, transition in a whole range of sectors towards more energy efficient and more clean energy reliant activities. The transition will take time, but green finance has to incentivize it and help promote it. And there's a lot of scope for collaboration in this area too. Finally, the broader challenge of having regional and international trade and investment flowing freely in ways that meet the needs of all our nations. The open world economy is not dead, and it still has a future ahead of it that will benefit all nations. We have to get past the recent mantras about how globalization is on the wane and it has somehow caused domestic problems and so on and so forth. Those are essentially mantras of defeatism. Not every country has done poorly because of globalization. In Europe, Germany has done very well through a global order, including helping workers benefit, workers by and large benefit. The US has done less well, but these are issues of domestic policy. They're not weaknesses of the global order. And we now have to focus once again on growing the global pie and focusing on how to equip all our people to benefit the most from open trade and investment, which can be done, and many countries have shown that it can be done. It requires two new forms of global connectivity. We know we're not going to go back to the old multilateral order, but we now need to forge new forms of global connectivity. I spoke about digital connectivity earlier, But fundamentally, we have to look at trade and investment more broadly. We've got to avoid the extremes of inward-looking policies, which are going to hurt those countries themselves, but also not go for a hyper-globalized world where you simply free up everything, you don't have standards, you don't have norms, and you don't have the accompanying domestic strategies to ensure that people benefit broadly from an open economy. But there are, in fact, options one can take that are in that large middle ground, that substantial middle ground for intelligent domestic policy making to be coupled with open economies and agreements across countries that maintain standards and move the standards up over time. Asia is critical, as Funabashi-san mentioned. Asia is critical. And Asia has to do its part now to strengthen a rules-based multilateral order and avoid hardening into separate blocks. And we do have to avoid thinking or ending up in a situation where we have to choose between China and the United States. We do not have to choose between China and the United States, and we must make it possible that we do not choose between China and the United States. We've concluded the RCEP, a very important achievement. We concluded the CPTPP, importantly with Japan's leadership, which is in fact a deep FTA, an example of a high standard multilateral trade agreement. And we now have to move further. We've been speaking about the free trade area of the Asia Pacific, FTAAP, for more than a decade. We now have RCEP and we have CPTPP. That's been completed. And we now have to work on the concrete pathways to build on RCEP and CPTPP to achieve an even larger free trade agreement. China is now part of the RCEP, and we'll have to find ways of keeping both China and the United States engaged in regional trade initiatives, including the CPTPP. They are the top partners, trading partners for most countries in our region, and their partnership will also create significant incentive for other countries to come on board, because we always conceived of this as an open architecture. It was never meant to be just for our region. It was meant to be an open architecture, and it is. It's encouraging that China has signaled its interest in CPTPP. It's also part of their domestic reform process with regard to the state-owned enterprises and intellectual property and other areas. It will take some time before China is ready, but the signal is very encouraging. It will also be in the US's strategic interests to seriously consider being part of these trade deals. Trade is a difficult political issue domestically in the United States, and it has been made a difficult political issue. But we should not lose hope in the options for the future. The Biden administration's immediate priorities will be domestic, as they have to be, but trade will have to stay within their window of options, because trade will help them to do better domestically as well. They will have to come to terms with the fact that trade has been a net plus for the US economy and its people, and it is domestic policies that need to adjust to help those who are disadvantaged to be able to move into new areas and to benefit from a growing economy. And other countries have shown how it can be done, and the United States can do so as well. So we have to find ways in which we get China and the United States onto this path that we have embarked on, with ASEAN starting off at the center of it, but it was really always intended to be a much larger effort to rebuild multilateralism from out of Asia. Let me just say by conclusion that this new solidarity that we are talking about, community and social solidarity, national solidarity and new public-private partnerships, and international solidarity with concrete partnerships that help to rebuild a new multilateralism, not simply going back to the old, which is not feasible anymore. They reinforce each other. It's not one or the other. It's not an either-or situation. We must work on domestic and national solidarity in order to take the most advantage of international openness and multilateralism. And we will not succeed in multilateralism without, at the same time, working on an inclusive society, taking care of the elderly who are very anxious about their futures, and making sure that everyone knows that it is the public good and social good that motivates government, that motivates business, and motivates our new partnerships. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tharman, for the very insightful views at the beginning of the conference. As always, I really appreciate. He emphasized 4 points. One of them is the economic reinforcement during the COVID-19 through financial and monetary policies. And secondly, he also emphasized the importance of the multilateralism, resumption of the multilateral cooperation. I think it is quite true, particularly in the field of climate change. And thirdly, he emphasized the importance of strengthening the private sector through incentives and everything, which would certainly lead to the strengthening of the human capitals. And fourthly, which is quite interesting, is that he emphasized on the need of the trust, social trust. I think it is quite needed to strengthen the social trust in the domestic field, but at the same time also in the international sphere, there is a need to strengthen the social trust. Thank you, Mr. Tharman. Well, stay safe, keep healthy, and we would like to see each other face to face someday in future. Thank you, Mr. Tharman. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.